Under the glittering sapphire shores of Nice, a grand villa hides dark secrets. Madame Héloïse Fournier, adorned with a priceless necklace, announces a change to her will, sparking greed and betrayal. By midnight, she lies dead on the beach, not a fall, but murder. Hercule Poirot, with his unmatched wit, unravels a web of lies, a financier's debts, an actress's ambition, a doctor's secrets, and a cousin's fear. A stolen sapphire, a staged railing, a cryptic diary. Every clue points to a killer among the elite. Can Poirot's gray cells expose the truth before the sea washes it away? Chapter 1. The arrival at Villa Azur. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Côte d'Azur, bathing the jagged cliffs of Nice in a warm, golden haze that bled into the deep sapphire of the Mediterranean. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming with a fastidious polish, stepped from the chauffeured car onto the gravel drive of Villa Azur. The estate, a sprawling confection of cream-colored stone and wrought-iron balconies, clung to the cliffside as if defying the sea below. His small, precise hands adjusted the brim of his hat, shielding his sharp eyes from the glare. The invitation to this weekend soirée had come from Madame Héloïse Fournier, a widow of considerable wealth and even greater reputation for cutting wit. Poirot's mustache gave the faintest quiver. Such gatherings, he knew, were rarely as innocent as their gilt-edged invitations suggested. The air carried the tang of salt and the faint perfume of bougainvillea, which spilled in vibrant cascades over the villa's terraces. As Poirot ascended the steps to the entrance, his cane tapped a deliberate rhythm, each step a meditation. He observed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker, the liveried footman who opened the door with a shade too much deference, the distant clink of crystal from within, the nervous flicker in the eyes of a maid polishing a silver tray. "The little gray cells," Poirot murmured to himself. "They are already at work." Inside, the grand salon of Villa Azur sparkled under chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the opulence of its guests. Madame Fournier, resplendent in a gown of midnight blue, her throat adorned with a sapphire necklace that caught the light like the sea itself, greeted Poirot with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she purred, "how charming that you could join us. Your reputation for observation precedes you." Poirot bowed, noting the faint edge in her voice, as if she were testing him already. The guests were a carefully curated ensemble, each a study in contrasts. Monsieur Claude Renaud, a financier with sleek hair and a smile that suggested a shark circling prey, sipped cognac with an air of ownership. Mademoiselle Vivienne Leclerc, a rising actress whose porcelain beauty masked a calculating gaze, laughed too brightly at a jest no one else heard. Dr. Etienne Morel, a physician with a reserved demeanor and eyes that lingered too long on the room's exits, stood apart, nursing a glass of mineral water. And then there was Armand Dubois, Madame Fournier's distant cousin, whose rumpled suit and twitching fingers betrayed a man ill at ease in such company. The staff, under the command of Jacques, the butler, moved with the silent efficiency of shadows, their faces betraying nothing, yet revealing all to Poirot's practiced eye. Dinner was a lavish affair, served on a terrace overlooking the shimmering sea. The conversation sparkled as brightly as the silverware, yet Poirot detected undercurrents. Renaud's barbed remarks about Madame's investments, Vivienne's coy deflections of personal questions, Morel's silence punctuated by sharp glances, Armand's stammered attempts at charm. Madame Fournier presided like a queen, her sapphire necklace glinting with every turn of her head. As dessert was cleared, she rose, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "My dear friends," she announced, her eyes sweeping the table, "I have decided to revise my will. Some of you may find your futures, shall we say, altered." A hush fell. Renaud's glass paused at his lips. Vivienne's smile froze. Morel's fingers tightened on his napkin. Armand coughed, a flush creeping up his neck. Poirot, sipping his tisane, observed the tableau, his mind cataloguing each reaction. Most interesting, he thought. The evening progressed with music and more champagne, but the mood had shifted. Guests drifted to the terrace's edge, where the cliff dropped precipitously to the shore below. Poirot, ever watchful, noted Vivienne's sapphire earrings, smaller cousins to Madame's necklace, catching the moonlight. He overheard Renaud muttering to Jacques about a private matter with Madame. Armand, meanwhile, hovered near the balustrade, his eyes darting to the shadows beyond. It was past midnight when a scream shattered the night's revelry. Poirot, who had retired to the library with a volume of Balzac, was among the first to reach the shore below the cliffs. There, illuminated by the cold light of the moon, lay Madame Eloise Fournier, her body crumpled on the sand, her sapphire necklace gone. Her face, once so commanding, was still, her eyes staring blankly at the stars. The guests gathered, their gasps and murmurs a cacophony of shock, or perhaps, Poirot mused, of feigned innocence. Inspecteur Giraud, summoned from Nice, declared it a tragic fall. Poirot, kneeling beside the body, noted the undisturbed sand and a faint, unnatural mark at her throat. "Non," he said softly, rising to his feet. "This was no accident." Chapter 3. The Guests Under Scrutiny. The morning sun climbed over the cliffs of Nice, its rays piercing the tall windows of Villa Azur's salon, where Hercule Poirot had summoned the guests. The room, with its gilded mirrors and plush velvet chairs, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the tension coiled among those assembled. Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the space with an authority that needed no bluster. His mustache, perfectly symmetrical, framed a face serene yet alert, his eyes darting like quicksilver to each guest in turn. The air carried a faint scent of lavender polish, mingling uneasily with the undercurrent of fear. Monsieur Claude Renaud lounged against a marble fireplace, his tailored suit as sharp as his gaze, though Poirot noted a slight tightening of his jaw when their eyes met. Mademoiselle Vivienne Leclerc sat poised on a divan, her delicate hands folded, but her sapphire earrings, gleaming with a borrowed opulence, trembled faintly as she shifted. Dr. Etienne Morel stood near a bookcase, his fingers tracing the spine of a medical volume, his expression one of studied detachment. Armand Dubois, Madame Fournier's cousin, perched on the edge of a chair, his knees bouncing like a schoolboy awaiting reprimand. Jacques, the butler, hovered at the room's edge, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice soft yet cutting through the murmurs like a bell. "We are gathered to consider a crime most heinous. Madame Fournier did not fall. She was murdered, strangled, I believe, and her body placed upon the shore to deceive. The truth, it hides among you, and I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover it." A gasp rippled through the room. Vivienne's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with theatrical dismay. Renaud snorted, lighting a cigarette with a flourish. "Preposterous," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "You have no proof, monsieur. The police say it was an accident." Poirot's smile was a study in patience. "The police, monsieur, see what is shown. I see what is hidden." He paced slowly, his cane tapping a rhythm that seemed to sync with the pulse of the room. "Let us begin with the alibis," he said, turning to Renaud. "You, monsieur, where were you when the scream was heard?" Renaud's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained smooth. "I was on the lower terrace, enjoying a cigar, alone. The night was fine, and I needed air." Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on the financier's manicured hands, which bore no trace of sand or struggle. "And yet," Poirot mused, "your cigar, it leaves a scent most distinctive. We shall see." He turned to Vivienne, whose porcelain beauty seemed strained under his scrutiny. "Mademoiselle Leclerc, you were seen near the upper terrace, no? Your scarf, it was caught on the railing." Vivienne's laugh was a delicate chime, but her eyes darted to the side. "I was restless, Monsieur Poirot. I walked the terrace, yes, but I returned to my room before the tragedy." Poirot tilted his head, noting the hesitation in her maid's eyes when questioned earlier. "Your maid, she is not so certain of the time," he said, gently, watching Vivienne's fingers tighten on her shawl. Dr. Morel was next, his voice calm but clipped. "I was in my room, reading. Medical journals, you understand. The hour was late, and I heard nothing until the scream." Poirot's eyes flicked to the bookcase, where a pristine copy of Traité de Médecine sat, its pages uncreased. "A dedicated scholar," Poirot said. "Yet your book, it has not been opened this week, I think." Morel's lips thinned, but he said nothing. Armand Dubois, when addressed, stammered, his face paling. I was in the gardens, Monsieur Poirot. I couldn't sleep. I saw nothing, only a shadow near the cliff." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Poirot's expression softened, but his mind was relentless. "A shadow, monsieur? Or perhaps a reflection of your own fears?" Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. "Each of you," he said, "has a connection to Madame Fournier. Her wealth, her will, her secrets. They bind you. Let us consider the necklace, the sapphire that adorned her throat. It is gone. But why? A thief? Or a symbol?" He paused, noting Vivienne's earrings again, their deep blue catching the light like a whisper of the missing jewel. "Mademoiselle, your earrings, they are a gift from Madame, no?" Vivienne nodded, her smile tight. "She was generous," she said, "to those she favored." Poirot's attention shifted to a discovery made earlier that morning. In Madame's study, behind a portrait of her late husband, he had found a safe, its door ajar. Inside, only a single item remained, a scrap of paper bearing the word Sapphire in Madame's elegant script. He produced it now, holding it aloft like a talisman. "This," he said, "is a clue, but to what? A jewel? A code? A betrayal?" The guests exchanged glances, some wary, others defiant. Jacques, standing by the door, shifted imperceptibly, his fingers brushing his cuff. Poirot's gray cells were alight, piecing together the fragments. The bruise on Madame's throat suggested a cord or chain, perhaps the necklace itself. The undisturbed sand on the shore pointed to a body moved after death. The broken railing, with no fresh damage, was a deliberate misdirection. And now, this cryptic note. He recalled Madame's dinner announcement. her intent to revise her will. "Money," he murmured. "It is the root of many evils, but not all. There is also pride, ambition, fear." He addressed the group once more. "You will remain at Villa Azur," he said, "until I have unraveled this knot. The truth, it is like the sapphire, hard, brilliant, and hidden in plain sight." Renaud scoffed. Vivien's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Morel's face remained a mask, and Armand seemed to shrink further into his chair. Jacques, ever silent, bowed slightly, but Poirot caught the briefest flicker of his gaze toward Renaud. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind tracing the threads of motive and opportunity. The sapphire earrings, the empty safe, the shadow in the garden. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. He stepped onto the terrace, the sea sparkling below, and inhaled deeply. "The truth," he said to the wind, "it will not hide for long, not from Hercule Poirot." Chapter 4. The Shadow in the Garden. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the gardens of Villa Azur in hues of amber and violet. Hercule Poirot, his hat tilted against the evening breeze, strolled the winding paths, his cane sinking softly into the earth. The air was fragrant with jasmine and the distant murmur of waves, but Poirot's mind was far from the tranquil beauty of the Côte d'Azur. The shadow Armand Dubois had mentioned, a fleeting figure near the cliffs, gnawed at his thoughts. Was it a phantom of guilt or something more tangible? His gray cells, ever restless, demanded answers. The gardens, meticulously tended, stretched from the villa's terraces to the cliff's edge, where cypresses stood like sentinels against the sea. Poirot paused near a stone bench, his eyes scanning the ground. There, half hidden by a lavender bush, lay a cigarette stub, its tip stained with a faint gold filter, a brand unfamiliar to the household stock. He retrieved it with a handkerchief, noting its dampness from the evening dew. "Most curious," he murmured, slipping it into an envelope. "A stranger, perhaps, or a guest who wishes to appear as one." He summoned Pierre, the villa's gardener, a wiry man with hands calloused from years of toil. Pierre's eyes darted nervously as Poirot questioned him. "Oui, monsieur," he admitted. "3 days ago, I saw a man in a dark coat near the cliffs. He was not a guest, nor staff. He stood by the cypress grove, watching the villa, then vanished when I approached." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And you told no one?" Pierre shrugged, his face sheepish. "I thought him a trespasser, nothing more. Madame did not like disturbances." Poirot dismissed Pierre and turned his attention to the cliff's edge, where the path narrowed dangerously. The broken railing above loomed in his mind's eye, its staged damage a silent accusation. He descended to the shore below, retracing the route Madame Fournier's body had taken. The sand, now disturbed by police boots, still held no trace of a fall's chaos, no scattered pebbles, no drag marks. She was carried, Poirot concluded, with care to preserve the illusion. Returning to the villa, he sought Armand Dubois, finding him in the conservatory, his fingers fidgeting with a glass of brandy. Armand's face, pale and drawn, seemed to age under Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Dubois," Poirot said, his voice gentle but unyielding. "You spoke of a shadow. Describe it, s'il vous plaît." Armand's eyes widened, his glass trembling. "It was dark, monsieur, near the cliffs. A figure, tall, moving quickly. I I thought it was my imagination, the wine, perhaps. Poirot leaned closer, his eyes piercing. And yet, you did not drink wine last night, only water. Why this shadow, monsieur? Why now? Armand's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. I owed Madame money, a debt from years ago, when my business failed. She was kind, but she never forgot. Last night, she threatened to cut me from her will. His eyes brimmed with tears. I loved her, Monsieur Poirot, like a sister. I could never harm her. Poirot's expression softened, but his mind was relentless. Love, monsieur, can bind as tightly as debt. Where were you when the scream was heard? In the gardens, Armand insisted. Near the fountain, I swear it. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. The fountain was far from the cliffs, yet close enough to hear a cry. He left Armand, his thoughts turning to the cigarette stub. Its gold filter suggested wealth, yet its presence in the garden hinted at carelessness, or intent. In the villa's library, Poirot examined the terrace doors, their glass panels offering a clear view of the cliff's edge. A faint scratch on the lock caught his attention, barely visible but deliberate, as if someone had tampered with it. To enter or to exit, he mused. He recalled Jacques' admission of Madame's argument with Claude Renaud. Seeking the butler, he found him polishing silver in the pantry, his movements precise, but his eyes wary. Jacques, Poirot said, you heard Madame argue with Monsieur Renaud. Was there anyone else on the terrace that night? Jacques hesitated, his cloth pausing. I saw Mademoiselle Vivienne, monsieur, near the railing. Her scarf caught the wind, and she laughed, but her eyes were sharp, watching Madame. Poirot's lips curved slightly. And Monsieur Renaud, his cigar? Did you see where he smoked it? Jacques shook his head. He said the lower terrace, but I smelled smoke near the upper one, where Madame stood. Poirot returned to the terrace, the sea now a dark expanse below. He stood where Madame had last been seen, reconstructing the night. The argument with Renaud, Vivienne's presence, the shadow in the garden, all wove a tapestry of suspicion. The cigarette stub suggested an outsider, yet its brand hinted at someone within the villa's circle. He thought of the sapphire necklace, its absence a glaring clue. Was it stolen for value, or to obscure a deeper truth? As dusk deepened, Poirot's gaze settled on the cypress grove, where Pierre had seen the stranger. He walked the path, his cane probing the earth, and found a faint footprint, half erased by wind, its size larger than any guest's. A man in a dark coat, he murmured, or a disguise to mislead. The scratch on the terrace door, the cigarette stub, the footprint, they were threads in a web, but the spider remained hidden. Poirot's gray cells churned. Madame's announcement about her will had stirred the pot, but the bruise on her throat, the staged railing, and the undisturbed sand pointed to a plan both bold and precise. The shadow, he said to the gathering night. It is not one person, but many motives converging. I, Hercule Poirot, will find the truth in their tangle. He turned back to the villa, its lights glowing like beacons of deceit. The guests, he knew, would be dining soon, their masks of civility firmly in place. But Poirot saw beyond the surface, to the currents of greed, fear, and ambition that swirled beneath. The shadow in the garden was a clue, but whether it was a person or a projection of guilt, only time and his little gray cells would reveal. Chapter 5. The Sapphire Clue. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Villa Azur's library, casting a soft glow on shelves laden with leather-bound volumes. Hercule Poirot sat at a mahogany desk, his small hands folded, his eyes fixed on a single page from Madame Eloise Fournier's diary, discovered among her private papers. The entry, written in her elegant, looping script, read, "The sapphire hides the truth." The words, cryptic yet deliberate, seemed to pulse with meaning. Poirot's mustache quivered as his gray cells turned over the phrase, seeking its place in the puzzle of her murder. The sapphire necklace, stolen from her throat, was more than a jewel. It was a key, but to what lock? He closed the diary, his mind retracing the clues. The bruise on Madame's neck, suggesting strangulation by a cord or chain. The undisturbed sand on the shore, proof her body was moved. The staged railing, a clumsy deception. The cigarette stub in the garden, hinting at an outsider or a clever ruse. And now this diary entry, a whisper from the grave. Poirot rose, his cane tapping softly as he moved to the window, where the Mediterranean sparkled with deceptive calm. "The truth," he murmured, "it is like the sea, deep, restless, and waiting to be plumbed." He summoned Mademoiselle Vivienne Leclerc to the library, her presence announced by the faint click of her heels. She entered, her beauty as striking as ever, though her eyes held a guarded flicker. The sapphire earrings, glinting at her ears, drew Poirot's attention. "Mademoiselle," he began, his voice smooth as velvet. "Your earrings, they are most remarkable. A gift from Madame Fournier, you said. When did she bestow them upon you?" Vivienne's smile was practiced, but her fingers brushed the jewels nervously. "A month ago, Monsieur Poirot. She was fond of me, you see." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet she spoke of altering her will. Did she mention you in this regard?" Vivienne's gaze faltered. She promised me a small legacy, but we did not discuss it further." Her voice wavered, and Poirot noted the lie in its tremor. He dismissed her and turned his attention to Dr. Etienne Morel, who arrived with the measured tread of a man accustomed to scrutiny. Poirot gestured to a chair, his eyes never leaving the physician's face. "Doctor," he said, "your medical bag. It contains a vial of sedative, does it not? Strong enough, perhaps, to render a person compliant?" Morel's expression remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on the armrest. "I carry chloral hydrate for my patients, Monsieur Poirot. It is standard." Poirot's smile was disarming. "And yet, to subdue a woman of Madame's vigor, one might use such a drug, no? To ensure no struggle?" Morel's eyes flashed, but he replied coolly, "I had no reason to harm her. My practice thrives without her wealth." Poirot nodded, unconvinced, noting the doctor's steady hands, hands that could wield a syringe or a strangling cord with equal precision. Next, Poirot sought Monsieur Claude Renaud, finding him in the billiard room, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The financier's charm was undimmed, but Poirot's keen gaze caught the faint stain of nicotine on his fingers, matching the brand of the garden stub. "Monsieur Renaud," Poirot said, circling the table, "you argued with Madame about debts, a considerable sum, I understand." Renaud's laugh was sharp. "A trifling matter, monsieur. I always repay my debts." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, I found this in your room." He produced a torn letter, its fragments pieced together, demanding payment from Madame for services rendered. Renaud's face darkened. "That was private business," he snapped. "It proves nothing." Poirot's smile widened. It proves, monsieur, that you had reason to fear her will's revision. Returning to the library, Poirot examined the diary entry again. The sapphire hides the truth. He considered the necklace, its heavy clasp and intricate links, and the earrings Vivienne wore. Were they connected, or was the sapphire a metaphor? He recalled the empty safe, its single scrap of paper bearing the word Sapphire. Crossing to the safe, he inspected its lock, noting faint scratches, similar to those on the terrace door. A thief, perhaps, he mused, or one who wished to know Madame's secrets. He ventured to the drawing room, where Jacques, the butler, was arranging a tray of decanters. "Jacques," Poirot said, his tone conversational, "you move through this house like a shadow, seeing all. Did Madame ever speak of her sapphire necklace, its value, its history?" Jacques's hands paused, his eyes meeting Poirot's briefly. "She cherished it, monsieur, but she said it was more than a jewel. A family secret, she called it." Poirot's gray cells sparked. "And did she confide this secret to anyone?" Jacques shook his head, but his hesitation spoke volumes. As evening approached, Poirot walked the terrace, the sea below whispering its endless secrets. The clues were aligning. The sedative in Morel's bag, potent enough to quiet a victim. The letter in Renaud's room, proof of financial desperation. Vivienne's earrings, a possible link to the stolen necklace. And the diary's cryptic message, pointing to a truth beyond mere wealth. The shadow in the garden, the scratched lock, the cigarette stub. They suggested an external hand, yet Poirot suspected the answer lay closer, within the villa's walls. He paused by the broken railing, its bent iron a silent witness. The bruise on Madame's throat haunted him, its pattern suggesting the necklace itself as the murder weapon. "The sapphire hides the truth," he repeated, his mind turning to the guest's motives. Renaud's debts, Vivienne's ambition, Morel's secrecy, Armand's fear. Each was a thread, but the knot remained untied. "The truth," Poirot said to the twilight. "It is near, but it requires one final spark to illuminate." He returned to the villa, his resolve firm. The guests would dine tonight, their masks of civility intact, but Poirot saw through them. The sapphire, whether jewel or secret, was the heart of the crime, and he, Hercule Poirot, would uncover its meaning before another dawn broke over the sapphire shores. Chapter 6. The Night's Reconstruction. The dining room of Villa Azur glowed under the soft light of candelabras, their flames casting flickering shadows across the polished mahogany table. Hercule Poirot had orchestrated this evening with the precision of a maestro, insisting that the guests and key staff recreate their movements from the night of Madame Eloise Fournier's murder. The air was thick with unease, the clink of cutlery and murmur of forced pleasantries barely masking the tension. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his small frame radiating authority, his eyes sharp as they scanned each face. The sea beyond the open terrace doors whispered restlessly, a reminder of the crime's grim stage. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate. "Tonight, we retrace the steps of that fatal evening. Each of you will show me where you were, what you did before the scream shattered the night. The truth, it hides in the details, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." His mustache twitched, a silent promise of revelation. Claude Renaud, the financier, went first, his swagger barely concealing a flicker of unease. He led Poirot to the lower terrace, where he claimed to have smoked a cigar alone. "Here," he said, gesturing to a wicker chair beneath a trellis of vines. I stood, enjoying the night air. Poirot inhaled deeply, noting the faint trace of tobacco, but it was stale, not the pungent aroma of Renault's gold-filtered brand. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, his eyes catching a glint of ash near the upper terrace steps, far from Renault's stated position. "Your cigar, monsieur. It travels, non?" Vivienne Leclerc followed, her silk scarf trailing as she moved to the upper terrace, where the broken railing loomed. "I walked here," she said, her voice soft but strained, admiring the sea before retiring. As she paused near the balustrade, her scarf caught on a jagged edge, just as Jacques had described. Poirot's gaze sharpened, noting the ease with which the fabric snagged. "Mademoiselle," he said, "your scarf, it is most cooperative with the railing. Did it catch so easily that night?" Vivienne's smile faltered, her fingers twisting the silk. "It was windy," she murmured, but her eyes avoided his. Dr. Etienne Morel, ever composed, led Poirot to his guest room, where he claimed to have been reading. He gestured to a chair by the window, a medical journal open on the table. Poirot examined the book, its pages pristine, the bookmark unmoved. "A dedicated reader," Poirot said, "yet the dust on this journal suggests it has not been touched in days." Morel's jaw tightened, but he offered no defense, his silence as telling as a confession. Armand Dubois, trembling, guided Poirot to the gardens, stopping by the stone fountain where he claimed to have wandered. "I was here," he stammered, "when I heard the scream." Poirot's eyes scanned the ground, noting the distance from the cliffs, close enough to hear, but too far to see clearly. "And the shadow you spoke of, monsieur?" Poirot pressed. Armand's face paled. "It was near the cypresses, moving fast. I thought it was nothing." Poirot nodded, his mind recalling the footprint he'd found, its size mismatched to Armand's small feet. Jacques, the butler, was last, recounting his duties in the pantry, preparing a tray for late-night guests. "I was below stairs," he said, his voice steady, "until the scream brought me running." Poirot observed the pantry's proximity to the terrace stairs, noting Jacques' clear view of the upper landing. "You saw Mademoiselle Vivienne, you said?" Poirot prompted. Jacques nodded. "And I saw Monsieur Renault arguing with Madame near the railing before he went below." Poirot's gray cells sparked. Renault had not mentioned this encounter. As the reconstruction concluded, Poirot gathered the group on the upper terrace, the sea's restless murmur a backdrop to his words. "Let us clarify," he said, his cane pointing to the broken railing. "Madame was strangled, likely with her own sapphire necklace, and her body carried to the shore. The railing, it was damaged before, to suggest a fall. But who stood here with her?" He turned to Vivienne. "Mademoiselle, you were seen here, your scarf entangled. Did you speak with Madame?" Vivienne's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. I asked her for a loan, for my career. She refused, harshly. But I left her alive, I swear." Poirot pivoted to Renault. "And you, monsieur, argued with Madame about your debts. Jacques saw you here, not on the lower terrace." Renaud's face reddened, his cigarette dropping ash. "It was a brief discussion," he snapped. "I left her standing." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "And yet, the ash of your cigar, it is found here, not below." He turned to Armand, whose hands shook. "Monsieur Dubois, You saw a shadow, but your own movements place you near enough to hear, perhaps to see. Why such fear?" Armand's voice broke. "I owed her everything. I could not hurt her." Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. To Morel, he said, "Your sedative, doctor, could ensure a victim's silence. Did you lend it to another?" Morel's eyes narrowed. "I am no murderer's accomplice," he said coldly. Poirot nodded, stepping back. "The truth, it is near," he said, his voice carrying over the wind. "The necklace, the sedative, the shadow, they point to a plan, but with a flaw. I, Hercule Poirot, see it forming." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with dread, Poirot lingered by the railing, the diary's words echoing. "The sapphire hides the truth. The necklace's clasp, the scratches on the safe, the cigarette stub. All were pieces, but the final shape eluded him. He looked to the sea, its waves glinting like sapphires in the moonlight. "One more step," he murmured, "and the curtain will rise on the killer's face." Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The Grand Salon of Villa Azur was a stage set for truth, its chandeliers casting a crystalline glow over the assembled guests. Hercule Poirot stood at the room's center, his small figure commanding silence as effectively as a conductor's baton. The sea beyond the windows roared softly, a restless counterpoint to the tension within. Claude Renaud leaned against a pillar, his eyes narrowed. Vivienne Leclerc sat with a rigid grace, her sapphire earrings catching the light. Dr. Etienne Morel stood with arms crossed, his face a mask of restraint. Armand Dubois fidgeted, his gaze darting to the exits, and Jacques, the butler, hovered at the edge, his composure fraying. Inspecteur Giraud, reluctantly present, scowled from a corner, his faith in accidents long since shaken. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. "We have danced around the truth, but now it stands revealed. Madame Eloise Fournier was murdered, strangled on this very terrace, her body carried to the shore to feign a fall. The sapphire necklace, her cherished heirloom, was not merely stolen, but used as the weapon of her death. I, Hercule Poirot, have unraveled the threads of this crime." A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot's raised hand silenced it. He produced a small object. Wrapped in his handkerchief, the heavy clasp of the sapphire necklace found hidden in a velvet pouch beneath Vivienne's dressing table. "Mademoiselle Leclerc," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "This clasp, it was in your possession. Why?" Vivienne's face paled, her voice a whisper. I found it on the terrace after the scream. I thought to keep it safe." Poirot's smile was gentle but unrelenting. "Safe, mademoiselle? Or to sell when your ambitions outstripped Madame's generosity?" He turned to Dr. Morel, holding up a vial from his medical bag. "Doctor, this chloral hydrate could render a victim helpless, ensuring no struggle. Your prescription records show it was dispensed recently, yet not to a patient." Morel's eyes flickered, but he remained silent, his composure a fragile shield. Poirot's gaze shifted to Renaud, producing the cigarette stub from the garden. "Monsieur Renaud, you claim to smoke on the lower terrace, yet this stub of your exclusive brand was found near the cliffs. A careless mistake for a man so precise." Renaud's laugh was sharp. "A cigarette proves nothing, Poirot. I walked the grounds. Perhaps I dropped it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Non, monsieur. The stub was damp from dew, placed that night, not before. You were on the upper terrace, with Madame." Poirot paced, his cane tapping a rhythm of revelation. Let us reconstruct. Madame announced her intent to revise her will, threatening fortunes. She stood on the terrace, her necklace glinting. Someone approached, perhaps with words of persuasion, perhaps with anger. A sedative, administered discreetly, dulled her senses. The necklace was torn from her throat, its chain tightened until life fled. The body was carried to the shore, the railing damaged to suggest a fall. But the sand betrayed no fall, and the clues, they pointed inward. He turned to Armand. Monsieur Dubois, your shadow in the garden was no stranger, but your own guilt. You feared Madame's will, yet you lacked the nerve for murder. Armand's shoulders sagged, relief mingling with shame. Poirot faced Morel. Doctor, you supplied the sedative, knowing its use, but you did not strike the blow. Your role was complicity, not execution. His gaze settled on Renaud, whose defiance faltered. Monsieur Renaud, your debts to Madame were a noose. She refused payment, threatened ruin. You argued on the terrace as Jacques saw. You used the sedative, provided by Morel, and strangled her with her own necklace, a cruel irony. You carried her to the shore, staging the fall. Poirot held up the torn letter from Renaud's room. This demand for payment, it seals your motive. Vivienne gasped, her hand flying to her earrings. But the necklace, I took it, yes, but only after. I saw him, Monsieur Poirot, I saw him with her body. Renaud lunged forward, his voice a snarl. Lies! You wanted her money, you scheming... Poirot's cane rapped sharply, silencing him. Enough, monsieur. Mademoiselle Leclerc, you are guilty of theft, but not murder. The clasp in your room confirms your story. You took the necklace, unaware it was a fake. Poirot turned to the room. The diary said, "The sapphire hides the truth." Madame's necklace was a decoy, a test of loyalty. She suspected betrayal, and it came. Renaud killed for money, Morel aided for gain, Vivienne stole for ambition. The shadow, the scratches, the stub, all distractions, but the truth shines clear. Giraud, chastened, stepped forward, signaling his officers to arrest Renaud, whose protests echoed as he was led away. Morel followed, his head bowed. Vivienne wept, her dreams shattered. Armand sank into a chair, whispering gratitude. Jacques, his mask slipping, offered Poirot a nod of respect. As the room emptied, Poirot stood alone, the sea's whisper filling the silence. "The human heart," he said softly. "It is more treacherous than any cliff." He adjusted his tie, his gray cells at rest, the sapphire shores of Nice once more serene, their secrets laid bare. Chapter 8. Epilogue. The train to Paris hummed along the tracks, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the restless glitter of the Mediterranean, fading into the distance. Hercule Poirot sat in his first-class compartment, his small hands folded neatly over the silver head of his cane, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sapphire shores of Nice, so deceptively tranquil, were now a memory, their secrets unraveled by the relentless precision of his gray cells. The case of Madame Héloïse Fournier's. Murder had been solved, the guilty apprehended, yet Poirot's mind lingered on the intricacies of human nature that had woven the tragedy. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, reflecting on the villa's final hours. Claude Renaud, his charm shattered, had been led away in handcuffs, his protests drowned by the weight of evidence, the cigarette stub, the torn letter, the damning testimony of Vivienne Leclerc. Dr. Etienne Morel, complicit in providing the sedative, faced his own reckoning, his clinical detachment no shield against justice. Vivienne, her ambitions tarnished by her theft of the false necklace, had left Villa Azur in tears, her sapphire earrings abandoned on her dressing table as if to shed the weight of her guilt. Armand Dubois, spared from suspicion but not from shame, had vowed to honor his cousin's memory with reform. Jacques, the butler, had resumed his duties with a quiet dignity, his respect for Poirot unspoken but evident in a final deferential bow. The diary's cryptic words, "The sapphire hides the truth," had been the key, not to a jewel's value, but to Madame's test of loyalty. Her necklace, a cunning replica, had exposed the greed and desperation lurking among her circle. Poirot's lips curved slightly, a wry acknowledgment of her foresight. "A woman most perceptive," he murmured, yet even she could not foresee the violence of betrayal. Outside, the landscape blurred into twilight, the sea giving way to rolling hills. Poirot's thoughts turned philosophical. The case had been a tapestry of motives: greed, ambition, fear, each thread knotted by human weakness. The sapphire shores, with their beauty and treachery, were a fitting stage for such a drama. "The heart," he said softly to the empty compartment. "It is more complex than any jewel, more dangerous than any cliff." He opened his valise, retrieving a small notebook where he recorded the case's details, a habit as meticulous as his appearance. The clues, the undisturbed sand, the staged railing, the scratched lock, the footprint in the garden, had aligned like stars in a constellation, guiding him to the truth. Yet it was the human element, the subtle tells of guilt and deception, that had brought clarity. "Order and method," he whispered. "They triumph always." As the train neared Paris, Poirot closed his eyes, the hum of the rails lulling his mind to rest. Another mystery solved, another truth revealed. The sapphire shores of Nice would fade into memory, but the lessons of Villa Azur would linger, a reminder of the delicate balance between elegance and evil. Hercule Poirot, his gray cells at peace, prepared for the next challenge, certain that somewhere another puzzle awaited his unparalleled intellect.